The sector of Segmentum Obscurus, known as the Pale Stars, went dark in the 41st millennium. It was a slow death. It started with the mining colonies on the edge of the system. Reports came back of workers vanishing in the night. Then the listening posts went silent. Then the fortress world stopped reporting in. High Command on Terra did not notice at first. The galaxy is big and worlds die every day. A clerk stamped a paper and a servitor filed a disk. The death toll rose to billions. But then the tax ships stopped coming back. That got attention. The Imperium runs on resources. When the gold stops flowing, the guns turn. A fleet was sent to investigate. It was Battle Fleet Calixis. They expected a rebel uprising or pirates. They found a graveyard. The ships drifted in space with their hulls torn open. There was no fire. There was no battle damage from lasers or plasma. The hulls were torn by claws. The crews were not missing. They were inside. They were dry. Every drop of fluid had been taken from their bodies. They looked like paper husks. The admiral of the fleet felt fear. He was a veteran of 100 wars. He had fought orcs and heretics. But this was silent. The enemy did not scream battle cries. It did not demand surrender. It just fed. The strategic cogitators could not find a pattern. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. They were the shadows in the corner of the eye. They were the cold breath on the neck. The morale of the fleet broke. Guardsmen refused to leave their bunks. Commissars shot them, but the fear did not stop. The dark was alive. The menace was identified as a migration of the Khrave. They were mind-eaters. They were ancient Xenos that treated humans like cattle. The Imperium had fought them before, but never in these numbers. The Khrave had established a feeding ground on the Hive World of Tenebris. The planet was covered in smog. The sun never touched the ground. It was a perfect hunting ground. The Imperial strategy was simple. It was brutal. Exterminatus. They would burn the planet. It was the only way to be sure. The logic was sound to them. Better to kill 1 billion innocent souls than let the Khrave spread. The cyclonic torpedoes were prepped. The prayer rites were read. The finger was on the trigger. But the machine spirit of the flagship rebelled. The sensors picked up a single ship leaving the warp. It was not an Imperial ship. It was small and black. It had no transponder codes. It did not hail the fleet. It flew straight past the battleships. It flew through the debris field. It flew directly toward the planet's surface. The admiral shouted orders to shoot it down. The gunners fired. The void shields of the small ship sparked. But it did not slow down. It breached the atmosphere of Tenebris. The tech priest analyzed the energy signature of the passenger. It was not human. It registered as a threat, but it also registered as something else. The cogitators matched the genetic marker to old myths from the time of the cradle. It matched legends of the blood drinkers. But this marker was different. It was a hybrid. The tech priest looked at the admiral with his metal eyes. He spoke in a flat voice. He said the logic of the situation had changed. He said the predator had entered the cage. The admiral did not fire the torpedoes. He wanted to see what would happen. He paused the destruction of the world. Down on the surface, the Khrave were feasting. They were pulling families out of hab blocks. They were strong and arrogant. They did not know that the rules of the game had just changed. They did not know that a hunter had landed in the smog. The Daywalker walked out of his ship. He checked his weapons. He checked his silver stakes. He checked his sword. He did not care about the Imperium. He did not care about the admiral in the sky. He only cared about the smell of the monsters. He smiled. It was time to work. The archives of the Imperium are vast. They record the rise and fall of heroes. But this entry is different. This is not the story of a hero. This is the story of a weapon that walks like a man. This is the story of the blade. The surface of Tenebris was a nightmare of steel and smoke. It was a hive world. This means the entire planet was one giant city. The buildings were so tall they poked through the clouds. The people at the bottom never saw the sun. They lived in the dark. They worked in the dark. And now they died in the dark. The invasion of the Khrave had been going on for 3 weeks. The Khrave are monsters from the deep dark of space. They are tall and thin. They have too many limbs. They do not eat meat. They eat minds. They eat the electric spark inside a brain. When they are done, the human is just a shell. The body is alive, but the person is gone. The Imperial Governor had sealed the upper spires. He locked the doors. He left the billions of workers in the lower city to die. He thought the heavy metal doors would save him. He was wrong. The Khrave can walk through walls if they want to. They can turn into shadow. But they started at the bottom. They liked the taste of fear. The workers in the lower city had plenty of fear. Sergeant Casso was a soldier of the Planetary Defense Force. He was tired. He had not slept in 4 days. His uniform was torn. His armor was cracked. He held his laser gun tight. The power pack was almost empty. He had 3 shots left. He stood behind a barricade of sandbags and dead bodies. He was guarding the entrance to Hive Block 44. Inside the block were 5,000 civilians. They were crying. Casso could hear them. It made his head hurt. The air smelled like ozone and old blood. The lights in the corridor flickered. They buzzed like angry flies. Casso looked at his squad. There were only 4 men left. Private Heck was shaking. He was looking at the shadows. He whispered that the shadows were moving. Casso told him to be quiet. But Casso knew Heck was right. The shadows were moving. The Khrave were coming. They did not march like soldiers. They flowed like water. They stuck to the ceiling. They crawled on the walls. The attack began with a scream. It was not a human scream. It was a psychic blast. It hit the soldiers in their minds. Casso felt a sharp pain behind his eyes. His nose started to bleed. Private Heck dropped his gun. He grabbed his head. He screamed that his brain was boiling. Then the shadows peeled away from the walls. The Khrave appeared. They were horrible to look at. They had pale skin that looked like wet rubber. Their faces had no eyes. They only had mouths full of needles. They moved too fast. Casso fired his laser gun. The red laser beam hit a monster in the chest. It burned the skin, but the monster did not stop. It laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. The monster grabbed Private Heck. It lifted him up with one claw. It placed its mouth over Heck's face. Heck stopped screaming. His body went limp. The monster dropped him. Heck was still breathing, but his eyes were white. He was gone. Casso tried to reload. His hands were slippery with sweat. He dropped the power pack. He cursed. He reached for his combat knife. It was a small piece of metal against a monster from the stars. He knew he was going to die. He thought about his wife in the upper spire. He hoped she was safe. The monster stepped over the barricade. It towered over Casso. It opened its mouth. Casso closed his eyes. He waited for the end. The end did not come. He heard a sound. It was a sound he had never heard before. It was the sound of a heavy coat moving through the air. It was the sound of silver hitting bone. Casso opened his eyes. The monster was freezing. It stood still. Then its head slid off its neck. The head hit the floor with a wet thud. The body fell backward. A man stood there. He was not a space marine. He was not big enough. But he was not a normal human either. He was dressed in black armor that looked like leather but was harder than steel. He wore a long black coat. He had dark glasses on his eyes, even though it was dark. He held a sword in his hand. The sword was not a chainsword. It did not have a motor. It was a straight blade of polished metal. It glowed with a faint light. The metal looked like silver, but it was stronger. The man did not look at Khrave. He looked at the other monsters. The Khrave hissed. They smelled something new. They smelled a predator. They did not like it. The Khrave usually smelled fear. This man had no fear. He had a cold anger. It felt like a block of ice in the room. The stranger moved. He was a blur. He moved faster than the eye could follow. He did not run. He flowed. He jumped over the barricade. He landed in the middle of the Khrave pack. There were 6 of them. They attacked him all at once. They slashed with their claws. They blasted him with mind power. The stranger did not care. He spun in a circle. His sword made a silver ring in the air. 2 Khrave fell down without their arms. The stranger pulled a gun from his coat. It was a pistol. It was blocky and ugly. It fired bullets, not lasers. But the bullets were explosive. He shot a Khrave in the chest. The monster blew apart. The blood of the alien was black and oily. It splashed on the stranger's coat. He did not blink. One of the Khrave was bigger than the others. It was a leader. It focused its mind on the stranger. It tried to crush his brain. Khrave felt the pressure from 10 meters away. He fell to his knees. The stranger stopped moving for a second. He grunted. The veins on his neck stood out. He shook his head. He looked at the leader. He smiled. It was a scary smile. It showed teeth that were too sharp. The stranger spoke. His voice was deep and rough. He said one thing. He said, "You are not the first monster to try that." The stranger threw a small metal disc. It looked like a throwing star. It hit the leader in the forehead. It stuck there. Then it beeped. A bright light exploded from the disc. It was not fire. It was pure white light. It was ultraviolet light. It was the light of a sun. The Khrave screamed. The light burned their skin. They were creatures of the dark. The light was poison to them. Their skin started to smoke and bubble. The leader fell down, clawing at its face. The stranger walked up to it. He put his sword away. He pulled out a shotgun. He pumped it once. He aimed at the leader's head. He pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the small corridor. The threat was over. The monsters were dead. The silence came back. It was heavy. Khrave stood up slowly. His legs were shaking. He looked at the stranger. The stranger was checking his weapons. He was wiping the black blood off his coat. He looked bored. He looked like this was just a job. Khrave cleared his throat. He did not know what to say. He asked who the stranger was. He asked if he was an angel from the Emperor. The stranger turned his head. The dark glasses reflected the flickering lights. He said he was no angel. He said angels live in the sky. He said he lives in the gutter. He asked Khrave a question. He asked where the big nest was. Khrave did not understand at first. He pointed down. He said the monsters came from the sublevels. They came from the sewers and the old transit tunnels. The stranger nodded. He turned to leave. Khrave took a step forward. He told the stranger to wait. He said it was suicide. He said there were thousands of them down there. The stranger stopped. He looked back over his shoulder. He said there were always thousands of them. He said, "It makes the math easy." Then he walked into the darkness. He vanished as quickly as he had arrived. High above the planet, the view was different. The Imperial battleship Hammer of Justice was in orbit. The bridge was a cathedral of iron and gold. Hundreds of crew members worked at terminals. They monitored the planet below. In the center of the room sat Magos Valen. He was a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus. He was more machine than man. He had metal tubes coming out of his back. His eyes were red lenses. He was watching a video feed from the surface. A servo skull had recorded the fight in Hab Block 44. The Muggles watched it again and again. He slowed it down. He zoomed in. He analyzed the data. The logic engines in his brain clicked and whirred. The data did not make sense to the Muggles. The stranger was biologically human, but he was altered. His muscle density was 3 times higher than a normal man. His reaction time was faster than a combat servitor, but he had no cybernetics. He had no metal implants. The Muggles checked the genetic database. He looked for matches with the Space Marines. There was no match. The stranger lacked the black carapace. He lacked the second heart. He was something else. The Muggles looked at the stranger's weapons. The sword was made of a titanium alloy that had been folded thousands of times. It was a master-crafted weapon. But the pistol and the shotgun were archaic. They used chemical propellants. They were primitive projectile weapons. But the ammunition was advanced. The bullets had cores of silver nitrate and garlic extract. The Muggles was confused. Garlic was a plant. Why put a plant inside a bullet? It was illogical. But the Muggles saw the results. The stranger killed the Khrave efficiently. The Khrave were a high-level threat. The Imperium usually sent Terminators to fight them. This single unit had eliminated a squad in 12 seconds. The Muggles calculated the probability of victory. If the stranger continued, he would disrupt the Khrave feeding cycle. This was interesting. The Muggles decided not to report the stranger to the Inquisition yet. The Inquisition would just burn him for being a mutant. The Muggles wanted to see more data. He wanted to see how the weapon performed under stress. He typed a command into his console. He ordered the servo skulls on the planet to follow the target. He designated the target as Subject Zero. The Muggles watched as Subject Zero entered the transit tunnels. The Muggles felt a small spark of emotion. It was curiosity. It was a dangerous emotion for a tech priest, but he could not help it. Down in the tunnels, the air was thick. It smelled of sewage and decay. The walls were wet. The only light came from glowing fungus that grew on the bricks. Blade walked silently. His boots made no sound on the wet floor. He adjusted his glasses. They were not just for style. They were tactical scanners. They showed him heat signatures. They showed him the layout of the tunnel. He could see the footprints of the monsters. They glowed faintly in his vision. The footprints were everywhere. This was a highway for them. Blade had hunted vampires for a long time. Vampires on Earth were arrogant. They thought they were the top of the food chain. These aliens were the same. They did not hide their tracks. They did not set traps. They thought the humans were just sheep. Blade hated that arrogance. It made him want to cut it out of them. He found a junction room. It was an old maintenance station. There were bones on the floor. Thousands of bones. They were clean and white. The Khrave had eaten everything. In the center of the room stood a group of humans. But they were not acting like humans. They were standing perfectly still. They were facing the wall. Their arms hung by their sides. They did not breathe deeply. Blade knew what they were. They were thralls. The Khrave controlled their minds. The aliens used them as eyes and ears. Blade stepped into the room. The thralls turned around all at once. It was creepy. Their movements were perfectly synchronized. They opened their mouths. A voice came out of them. It was not a human voice. It sounded like grinding stones. The voice spoke in Low Gothic. It asked who dared to enter the feeding ground. It asked if he wanted to join the flock. Blade did not stop walking. He drew his sword. He said he was not there to join. He was there to cancel the membership. The thralls attacked. They were just humans, but they were pushing their bodies to the limit. They ran fast. They did not care about pain. They threw themselves at Blade. Blade did not want to kill them. They were victims, but he had no choice. If he let them live, they would alert the masters. He moved with precision. He used the flat of his blade. He hit them in the head. He knocked them out. He moved like a dancer, ducking under punches, sweeping legs. In 10 seconds, the thralls were on the ground. They were unconscious. Blade stood over them. He looked at the tunnel ahead. He felt a presence. It was heavy and cold. It was watching him. The Khrave knew he was there now. The element of surprise was gone. Blade preferred it that way. He liked it when the prey knew he was coming. It made them make mistakes. He reached into his coat and pulled out a grenade. It was a special design. He had built it himself using parts he scavenged from the dead world. He had found a laspack and modified the output lens. He combined it with the chemical flare. He called it the sunrise. He pulled the pin. He held the lever. He walked into the dark tunnel. The tunnel widened into a massive cavern. It was an old underground train station. The trains were rusted heaps of metal. The ceiling was high. Hanging from the ceiling were pods. They looked like cocoons made of slime. Inside each cocoon was a person. They were asleep. They were being drained slowly. There were hundreds of pods, and guarding them were the Khrave. There were 50 of them. Warriors. They were bigger than the ones upstairs. They had armor plates made of bone. They held weapons made of crystal. In the center of the room was a creature that looked like a nightmare. It was a Khrave Magus. It floated in the air. Its head was huge and pulsing. It had 10 arms. It looked at Blade. The Magus spoke into Blade's mind. The voice was loud. It said he was a fool. It said his biological distinctiveness would be added to their collection. It said he was just meat. Blade stopped. He stood alone in the entrance. He looked at the army of monsters. He looked at the floating leader. He did not look impressed. He tossed the grenade in his hand. He spoke out loud. He said he had heard that speech before. He said it usually ends with the bad guy turning into dust. He threw the grenade. It sailed through the air. It landed in the middle of the warrior pack. The Khrave laughed. A simple explosive would not hurt them. They had shields. But the grenade did not explode with fire. It popped with a soft sound. Then it unleashed the sun. The cavern turned white. The light was blinding. The UV radiation flooded every corner. The Khrave shrieked. It was the sound of 1,000 banshees. Their shields flickered and died. The light burned their eyes. It disrupted their psychic connection. The Magus fell out of the air. It crashed onto the train tracks. Blade moved. He did not charge blindly. He ran to the side. He used the cover of the train cars. He fired his shotgun as he ran. Boom, boom, boom. Each shot took down a warrior. The silver shot tore through their soft armor. Blade was a machine of destruction. He vaulted over a train car. He landed on a warrior and drove his sword through its skull. He didn't stop. He rolled and came up shooting. The Magus recovered. It was angry. It screamed a psychic command. The surviving warriors charged. Blade was surrounded. He dropped the empty shotgun. He pulled out his second pistol. He held his sword in one hand and the pistol in the other. This was his style, the sword and the gun. He started to spin. He cut and shot. He was a whirlwind of black and silver. A warrior lunged. Blade sidestepped and cut its legs off. Another tried to blast him with mind fire. Blade shot it in the open mouth. He was outnumbered 50-1, but he was winning. He was winning because he fought with the rhythm they could not match. They were used to soldiers who stood in lines and fired lasers. They were not used to a warrior who moved like liquid. The Magus saw its warriors dying. It realized this was a real threat. It decided to intervene. It gathered the shadows of the room. It formed them into a giant spear. It threw the shadow spear at Blade. Blade saw it coming. His danger sense tingled. He could not dodge it. It was too wide. He crossed his sword and his pistol in front of his chest. He braced himself. The shadow spear hit him. It hit like a freight train. Blade flew backward. He smashed through a brick wall. He landed in a pile of rubble. The dust settled. The Magus floated closer. It thought the enemy was dead. It wanted to taste his mind. It wanted to see what made him so strong. Blade lay in the rubble. His coat was torn. His armor was cracked. He tasted blood in his mouth. He coughed. He felt his ribs. 2 were broken. He healed fast, but not that fast. He looked up. The Magus was hovering over him. Its tentacles were reaching out. Blade's hand moved. He reached for his belt. He had one trick left. A serum. He had synthesized it from the blood of a dead Khrave he found earlier. It was a risk. It might kill him, but it might give him the edge. He jammed the syringe into his neck. He pushed the plunger. The liquid fire went into his veins. His eyes turned red. His muscles swelled. He roared. He exploded out of the rubble. He was faster than before. He jumped into the air. He grabbed the Magus by its tentacles. The Magus was shocked. It tried to blast him with psychic energy. Blade ignored it. The pain was just fuel. He pulled himself up. He got close to the pulsing head. He whispered. He said goodnight. He drove his sword into the Magus's brain. He twisted the blade. The Magus screamed a silent scream that shattered all the glass in the station. Then it exploded. It turned into black dust. The connection was broken. The warriors screamed. Without the leader, they were confused. They held their heads. Blade fell to the ground. He landed on his feet, but he stumbled. The serum was wearing off. He was exhausted. The remaining warriors looked at him. They were afraid. They hissed and ran away into the dark tunnels. They did not want to fight the demon in black. Blade watched them go. He did not chase them. He had done what he came to do. He had broken the chain of command in this sector. The cocoons on the ceiling started to open. The psychic hold was gone. The people fell out. They were weak, but they were alive. Blade sat down on a piece of twisted metal. He took a deep breath. He wiped his sword with a rag. He put his glasses back on. He was tired, but the work was not done. This was just one nest. There were hundreds more. And there was something else. When he stabbed the Magus, he saw something in its mind. A flash of memory. He saw a shape in the sky. A massive shape. A hive ship. But not a Khrave ship. It was something older. Something worse. Blade frowned. He realized the Khrave were not the invasion. They were the scavengers. They were the vultures. The real predator was still coming. He stood up. He keyed his comm bead. He had stolen it from the dead sergeant. He broadcast on the open frequency. He said, "This is the Daywalker." He said, "Sector 4 is clear." He said, "Send medical teams." He said, "Do not send soldiers. Soldiers just get in the way." He walked towards the exit. He needed to find a secure location. He needed to rest. And he needed to prepare. The game had just become much more complicated. He walked out to the darkness and into the smog-filled twilight of the hive. The war for Tenebris had truly begun, and the blade was sharp. The Magos Varlin watched the vitals of Subject Zero return to normal. The Magos recorded the data. He made a note in his log. He wrote that the subject displays alpha-level combat proficiency. He wrote that the subject utilizes unknown alchemy. He wrote that the subject is a valuable asset. The Magos closed the file. He sent a coded message to the High Lords of Terror. The message was short. It said, "A new variable has been discovered. Potential weapon against the dark. Recommend observation. Do not terminate." The Magos turned back to his screens. He wanted to see what the Daywalker would do next, The galaxy was full of monsters. And now, finally, there was a monster who hunted them back. The arrival of Inquisitor Grendel changed the war in the sky. The bridge of the battleship Hammer of Justice grew cold when he entered. The air recyclers seemed to stop working. The crew stopped talking. Even the servitors seemed to work quieter. Inquisitor Grendel was a small man. He did not look like a warrior. He wore red robes made of velvet. He leaned on a cane made of black wood. But everyone knew who he was. He was a member of the Ordo Xenos. He was a hunter of aliens. He had burned a dozen worlds. He did not care about saving lives. He cared about saving the human soul. To him, a human soul was only safe if it was pure. And to him, purity meant death to anything different. Admiral Crick stood up from his command throne. He was a proud man. He wore medals from the Gothic War. But he bowed to the small man in the red robe. The Inquisitor did not bow back. He walked to the main viewing screen. He looked at the planet Tenebris below. It was a swirling ball of grey clouds. He tapped his cane on the metal deck. He asked for a status report. Admiral Crix cleared his throat. He explained the Khrave invasion. He explained the losses. He explained the pause in the bombardment. He pointed to Magos Valen. He said the tech priest had advised them to wait. He said there was an asset on the ground. Grendel turned his head slowly. He looked at Magos Valen. The tech priest did not feel fear. He was mostly machine, but his logic circuits warned him of danger. Grendel asked to see this asset. Valen pressed a rune on his console. The screen changed. It showed a grainy video from a security camera on the surface. It showed Blade. He was fighting in an alley. He was fast. He was brutal. He was drinking blood from a flask. Grendel watched for a long time. He did not blink. His face was like a stone mask. Then he spoke. His voice was like dry paper. He said it was an abomination. He said it was a mutant. He said it was a vampire. Valen tried to argue. He used logic. He said the subject was killing the Khrave. He said the kill ratio was efficient. He said the subject was saving Imperial resources. Grendel hit the console with his cane. It made a loud crack. He shouted. He said the Imperium does not use monsters to fight monsters. He said that is the path to damnation. He said, if you use a demon to kill a demon, you still have a demon left at the end. He ordered the Admiral to target the location of the mutant. He wanted a lance strike. A lance strike is a focused beam of energy. It is powerful enough to boil an ocean. It would vaporize the city block. It would kill Blade. It would kill the civilians around him. It would kill everyone. Admiral Crix hesitated. He said there were still loyal guardsmen in that sector. He said they were holding the line. Grendel looked at the Admiral. He asked if the Admiral wanted to be charged with heresy. He asked if the Admiral wanted to be executed for protecting a mutant. The Admiral looked at his crew. He looked at the screen. He nodded slowly. He gave the order to charge the lance batteries. The ship began to hum. The energy built up in the capacitors. The weapon aimed at the Hive City. The catastrophe was about to begin. The Imperium was about to fire on its own hero. Down on the surface, Blade did not know about the argument in the sky. He was busy. He was in a safe house in the middle levels of the Hive. The safe house was an old medical clinic. The doctor was a woman named Mara. She was tough. She had seen the gangs fight for years. She was stitching a cut on Blade's shoulder. The Khrave leader had hurt him more than he showed. Blade sat on a metal table. He was shirtless. His body was a map of scars. He had burn marks. He had knife wounds. He had bite marks. Mara looked at his skin. It was pale. It was cold to the touch. She asked him what he was. She asked if he was human. Blade put his dark glasses back on. He said he was human enough. He stood up. He tested his arm. The pain was there, but he could ignore it. He picked up his coat. He checked his weapons. He was low on ammo. The shotgun shells were almost gone. He had 5 silver stakes left. He had his sword. He needed more. He asked Mara where the Planetary Defense Force armory was. Mara laughed a sad laugh. She said the PDF was dead. She said the survivors were hiding in the Metroplex. She said the armory was overrun by the Shadow Walkers. Blade nodded. He liked the odds. It meant there would be plenty of weapons lying on the floor. He walked out of the clinic. The air outside was changing. It was getting colder. The smog was turning purple. Blade sniffed the air. He smelled ozone. He smelled blood. He smelled magic. The hairs on his neck stood up. The Khrave were doing something new. They were not hunting anymore. They were gathering. Blade climbed a fire escape ladder. He went to the roof of a hab block. He looked out over the city. What he saw made him frown. In the center of the sector was a large plaza. It used to be a market. Now it was a ritual site. Thousands of humans were walking towards the plaza. They were not running. They were walking in lines. They were the thralls. The Khrave were herding them like cattle. In the center of the plaza, the Khrave were building a tower. But they were not using stone. They were using bones. They were using the bodies of the dead. The tower was 50 feet tall. It was pulsing with purple light. The Khrave witches were dancing around it. They were singing a song that made Blade's teeth ache. The song was a psychic beacon. They were calling for help. They were calling for something big. Blade knew he had to stop it. If they finished the tower, the planet was lost. He checked his comm bead. He tried to find a frequency. He found a static-filled channel. It was Sergeant Casso, the soldier from the first fight. Casso was still alive. He was with a group of survivors near the Metroplex. Blade spoke into the bead. He told Casso to listen. He told him the plan. Casso said he was crazy. Casso said they had no heavy weapons. Blade said they didn't need heavy weapons. They just needed to be a distraction. Blade said he would handle the heavy work. Blade started to run across the rooftops. He jumped gaps that would kill a normal man. He slid down cables. He moved towards the plaza. He was a black shadow against the purple sky. He reached the edge of the market square. He hid behind a gargoyle statue. He watched. The Khrave were focused on the ritual. The tower was growing. The purple light was shooting up into the clouds. It was punching a hole in the atmosphere. Blade saw the leader of the ritual. It was an elder Khrave. It wore robes made of human skin. It held a staff made of crystal. Suddenly, the attack began. Sergeant Casso and his men opened fire from the west side of the plaza. They had found a heavy bolter. It chugged and roared. The explosive shells hit the line of Khrave warriors. The aliens screamed. They turned to fight. They thought the attack was the main threat. They did not see the real threat behind them. Blade dropped from the roof. He fell 100 feet. He landed on a Khrave warrior. The impact turned the alien into jelly. Blade rolled and stood up. He was inside the circle. He was 10 feet from the tower. The elder Khrave turned around. It saw the Daywalker. It hissed. It pointed its staff. A bolt of lightning shot out. Blade dodged. The lightning hit the ground and melted the concrete. Blade threw a silver stake. It flew straight and true. It hit the elder in the chest. The silver burned the alien flesh. The elder screamed and dropped the staff. Blade charged. He cut through 2 warriors. He reached the tower. He did not attack the aliens. He attacked the tower. He planted a satchel charge at the base. It was a melter bomb he had taken from a dead space marine earlier. He set the timer for 5 seconds. He ran. He ran faster than he had ever run. He grabbed a cable and swung away. The bomb went off. The explosion was silent for a split second. Then the heat wave hit. The bone tower vaporized. The purple light vanished. The ritual was broken. The psychic feedback loop snapped. The Khrave witches grabbed their heads. Their brains exploded from the shock. They fell down dead. The humans in the plaza woke up. The thralls looked around. They were confused. They started to run. It looked like a victory. Blade landed on a balcony. He watched the fire burn. He thought it was over. But he was wrong. The catastrophe was just starting. The psychic scream of the breaking tower did not just go up. It went down. It went deep into the crust of the planet. Tenebris was an old world. It had secrets buried deep underground. Secrets that had been sleeping for 60 million years. The Khrave ritual had been too loud. It had been like banging a drum in a graveyard. The dead things woke up. The ground began to shake. It was not a normal earthquake. It was a mechanical vibration. Buildings started to collapse. The pavement in the plaza cracked open. A green light shone from the cracks. It was not the purple light of the warp. It was the sickly green light of the Gauss. Blade looked down. He saw metal hands reaching out of the earth. They were made of living metal. They were the Necrons. A tomb world had been sleeping under the Hive City. The Khrave had woken them up, and the Necrons were grumpy. A monolith rose from the ground. It was a giant pyramid of black stone. It floated silently. Green lightning arced from its crystal tip. It vaporized a group of fleeing humans. It vaporized a squad of Khrave. The Necrons did not care about sides. They wanted everything off their lawn. Warriors marched out of the cracks. They marched in perfect lockstep. They held Gauss flares. They fired green beams that stripped the flesh from bone. The Khrave panicked. They tried to fight back, but their mind tricks did not work on machines. The Necrons had no souls to eat. The Khrave were being slaughtered. Blade realized the scale of the disaster. He had stopped one monster by waking up a bigger one. This was the history of the galaxy. Every victory brings a new horror. He saw Sergeant Carso's squad. They were pinned down. Necrons were advancing on them from one side. Khrave were attacking from the other. They were trapped. Blade had to choose. He could run. He could fade into the shadows and survive. That is what a vampire would do. But Blade was not just a vampire. He was a man. He jumped back into the fight. He landed in front of Carso. He fired his pistols. The explosive bullets hit a Necron warrior. They knocked it back, but the metal repaired itself. The Necron stood up again. Blade cursed. He switched to his sword. He cut the Necron's head off. That worked. The body fell. Blade yelled at Carso to move. He told them to get to the tunnels. He covered their retreat. He was a whirlwind of steel. He fought the aliens and the machines. He was tired. His wounds were opening up, but he did not stop. High above, the hammer of justice was ready to fire. The lance was charged. Inquisitor Grendel watched the screen. He saw the green light. He saw the Necrons. He did not panic. He smiled a cruel smile. He said this confirmed his theory. The planet was tainted beyond saving. He said the Xenos were fighting the Xenos. He said it was time to purify them all. He ordered the fire. Admiral Crix shouted a warning. He said the energy signature of the Necrons was reacting with the atmosphere. He said a lance strike might cause a chain reaction. Grendel did not listen. He pressed the button himself. The lance fired. A beam of pure white light shot down from space. It hit the plaza. It hit the Necron monolith. The result was not what Grendel expected. The Necron living metal absorbed the energy. It fed on it. The monolith glowed brighter. It reflected the beam. The energy shot out sideways. It sliced through the Hive City like a hot knife through butter. The upper spires collapsed. Millions of tons of steel fell towards the lower levels. The shockwave knocked the battleship in orbit off its course. Alarm screamed on the bridge. On the ground, the world ended. The blast wave threw Blade against a wall. He heard his bones snap. The sky was falling. The city was collapsing on top of him. He saw Casso and his men get buried under rubble. He saw the Necrons marching through the fire. He saw the Khrave dying in droves. Blade tried to stand up. He couldn't. His legs were broken. He dragged himself into a storm drain. He pulled a metal grate over his head. The darkness took him. The debris piled up. He was buried alive. The dust settled after 3 hours. The sector was gone. It was just a crater of twisted metal and fire. The Necrons were still there. They were patrolling the ruins. The Khrave were scattered and broken. The Imperial Fleet was pulling back to high orbit. They were afraid of the green lightning. Inquisitor Grendel was furious. He blamed the Admiral. He blamed the tech priest. He did not blame himself. He ordered a quarantine of the planet. No one comes in. No one goes out. He declared the planet perdita, lost. Deep under the rubble, in the dark, a heart was still beating. It beat slowly, once every minute. Blade was in a coma. His body was trying to heal. He was trapped under a mountain of steel. He had no food. He had no water. He had no blood. But he had something else. He had anger. He was angry at the aliens. He was angry at the Imperium. They had tried to kill him. They had killed the people he tried to save. In the dark, his eyes opened. They glowed red. He did not need light to see. He saw a way down. The storm drain led deeper. It led away from the Necrons. It led to the roots of the hive. Blade began to crawl. He dragged his broken legs. He would heal. It would take time, but he would heal. And when he came back to the surface, he would not be the hunter anymore. He would be the executioner. The strategic situation had changed. The Imperium had abandoned the world. The Necrons claimed the surface. The Khrave hid in the shadows. And Blade was the ghost in the machine. He was the variable that the logic engines could not predict. Magos Valen sat in his quarters on the ship. He was looking at a datapad. It was the last transmission from Blade's comm bead before the blast. It was just a sound. It was the sound of a sword sharpening. Valen saved the file. He knew the creature was not dead. Biological subjects with that level of regeneration were hard to kill. Valen decided to send a probe, a small stealth drone. He wanted to watch. He wanted to see how the subject adapted to the apocalypse. The war was no longer about saving the planet. It was about survival. The catastrophe was total. The food supplies were cut off. The water recyclers were broken. The survivors on the planet were trapped between the soulless machines and the mind-eating aliens. Disease started to spread. The grey rot, it was called. It came from the dust of the destroyed buildings. People coughed up black slime. Hope was gone. The statues of the Emperor were toppled. The priests stopped praying. They started hiding. But in the deep tunnels, legends began to spread. The survivors whispered about a shadow. They said he walked through the radiation zones. They said he ate the monsters. They said he was the Emperor's vengeance. They left gifts for him. A box of bullets found in a dead soldier's pocket. A bandage. A flask of clean water. They left them at crossroads in the dark. And in the morning, the gifts were gone. And in their place, there was a dead alien. Sometimes a Khrave, sometimes a Necron. The head was always missing. The blade was still hunting. The strategic reality of the war shifted to attrition. The Necrons were slow. They were waking up sector by sector. They were methodically cleansing the planet. Their goal was to seal the tomb again. To do that, they needed to kill all biological life. The Khrave were desperate. They needed biomass to heal and to breed. They became more aggressive. They attacked Necron patrols. It was a war of monsters. The humans were just the grass that got trampled. Blade understood this. As he healed in the dark, he made a new plan. He could not fight armies. He could not fight a battleship. He had to fight the leaders. He had to cut the head off the snake, and he had to do it before he starved to death. His thirst for serum was growing. The synthetic blood was gone. He looked at the rats in the tunnels. He looked at the dead bodies. He felt the hunger. It was a beast inside him. He fought it. He meditated. He cleaned his sword. He focused on the mission. He found a way into an old Mechanicus data hub. It was buried deep. It still had power. He hacked the terminal. He looked for maps. He looked for energy spikes. He found what he was looking for. The Necrons were building a pylon. It was a device to block the warp. If they finished it, the Khrave would die. That was good. But it would also kill every human psyker. It would cut the planet off from the Imperium forever. And the Khrave were building a new nest. They were breeding a queen, a mother of monsters. Blade looked at the map. 2 targets, 2 impossible missions. He smiled his sharp smile. He liked it when things were simple. He loaded his last magazine. He sharpened his sword one last time. He stood up. His legs were strong again. The catastrophe had happened. Now it was time for the response. He walked into the dark, ready to make them all pay. The war on Tenebris entered its 3rd month. It was no longer a war of conquest. It was a war of extinction. The surface of the planet was a dead zone. The Necrons marched in perfect geometric patterns. They killed anything that had a pulse. They killed the rats. They killed the birds. They killed the moss growing on the rocks. Their logic was simple. To secure the tomb, they had to remove all variables. Life is a variable. Therefore, life must be removed. The Khrave had retreated into the deep sublevels of the Hive. They were starving. The blockade in orbit stopped fresh humans from arriving. The Khrave started to eat each other. The strong ate the weak. This made the survivors stronger. It made them desperate. Blade lived in the space between these 2 monsters. He had established a base in Sector 7. It was an old water processing plant. The pipes were dry, but the walls were thick. He had gathered a small army. They were not soldiers anymore. They were ghosts. Sergeant Casso was still alive. He had lost an eye to a laser burn. He wore a patch made of dirty leather. He led a group of 50 men and women. They were gaunt. Their skin was grey from the lack of sun and the recycled air. They called themselves the Tunnel Rats. They did not fight to win. They fought to live one more day. Blade sat on a crate of ammunition. He was working on his weapons. His shotgun was modified. He had salvaged a Gauss flare from a destroyed Necron warrior. He had taken the magnetic coils. He strapped them to the barrel of his shotgun. He wired them to a power cell. It was dangerous. If he fired it wrong, it would blow his hands off. But he needed the power. Lead bullets bounced off Necron armor. He needed to strip their atoms away. He tested the action. Clack, clack. It sounded heavy. It sounded mean. He looked at his sword. The edge was chipped. It had cut through bone, steel, and stone. He took a whetstone. He ran it along the blade. Rasp, rasp, rasp. The sound echoed in the silent plant. Casso walked up to him. Casso moved slowly. His joints hurt. The damp cold of the tunnels was killing them all slowly. Casso reported the situation. He said the water filters were failing. They had 3 days of water left. He said the scouts had found something. They found a new energy spike in the north. Blade stopped sharpening his sword. He looked at the map on the table. The north was Necron territory. It was the silent zone. No one went there and came back. Blade asked for details. Casso said the scouts saw a structure rising. It was black stone. It was humming. It made their teeth hurt from a mile away. Blade nodded. He knew what it was. It was a pylon. The Necrons were building a dampener. If they finished it, the pylon would project a field. This field would calm the warp. That sounded good, but it was not. It would sever the connection between the soul and the body. Humans would become lethargic. They would lose the will to live. They would just sit down and wait to die. It was the ultimate weapon of the machines. Peace through silence. Blade stood up. He put on his coat. It was tattered. He had patched it with pieces of Khrave leather. He looked like a scavenger king. He told Casso to get the men ready. They were moving. Casso asked where. Blade pointed to the red X on the map. He pointed to the Khrave nest in the south. Casso was confused. He said the pylon was in the north. Blade smiled. He said he knew. He said he was going to invite the Khrave to a party. The plan was a strategic chain reaction. Blade could not destroy the pylon alone. It would be guarded by immortals and Lich Guard. He could not kill the Khrave Queen alone. She was surrounded by thousands of warriors. But if he could bring them together, they would destroy each other. He needed bait, and he was the best bait in the galaxy. He was a creature of the warp and the material world. His blood was unique. To the Khrave, he smelled like a feast. To the Necrons, he registered as a high-level anomaly. Blade left the base alone. He moved through the ventilation shafts. He traveled south. The air got warmer. It smelled of musk and ozone. The Khrave nest was in the old fusion reactor core. It was a massive chamber. Blade stayed in the shadows. He used his thermal vision. The heat was intense. The walls were covered in alien slime. In the center of the reactor, the Queen sat. She was enormous. She was a bloated sack of flesh and psychic power. She was laying eggs. The eggs were hatching rapidly. The new Khrave were born hungry. Blade did not attack. He revealed himself. He stepped into the light. He cut his own hand with his sword. The blood dripped onto the hot floor. Sizzle. The smell of the blood hit the air. It was potent. It smelled like life. It smelled like power. The Queen stopped laying eggs. She turned her massive head, her many eyes focused on Blade. She let out a psychic scream. It was a command. Feast! The Khrave warriors roared. They scrambled over each other. They charged at Blade. Blade did not fight. He ran. He ran faster than a human could. He ran north. He led the swarm. He was the rabbit leading the wolves. He ran through the tunnels. He blasted obstacles with his new shotgun. The Gauss slugs disintegrated doors and walls. He kept the wound on his hand open. He left a trail of scent. The Khrave followed. They were a tide of monsters. They filled the tunnels. They climbed the walls. They were mindless with hunger. Blade led them for 10 miles. He led them up. He led them to the surface. He burst out of a sewer grate in the silent zone. The air was cold and dry. The sky was dark. The green lightning of the Necrons illuminated the ruins. In the center of the plaza stood the pylon. It was half finished. It was surrounded by Necron floating platforms. Construction scarabs were welding black stone. A phalanx of Necron warriors stood guard. They stood perfectly still. Blade ran straight at them. The Necrons detected him. Target acquired. They raised their Gauss flares. Green beams shot at him. Blade slid on the ground. He dodged. He weaved. He did not shoot back. He ran past them. He ran towards the pylon. The Necrons tracked him. They prepared to fire a volley, but then the ground exploded behind Blade. The Khrave swarm burst out of the sewer, thousands of them. They poured into the plaza like a flood of black oil. The Necrons paused. Their logic circuits reassessed the threat. Threat level, extremist. They switched targets. They ignored the single man. They fired at the swarm. The battle began. It was chaos. The green beams of the Necrons met the purple psychic blasts of the Khrave. The noise was deafening. Blade reached the base of the pylon. He climbed up the scaffolding. He found a hiding spot on a high beam. He watched. The Khrave were dying by the hundreds. The Necron Gauss weapons stripped their flesh away layer by layer. But there were too many Khrave. They overwhelmed the Necron lines. They tackled the metal warriors. They ripped them apart with claws and telekinesis. The Necron Lord appeared. He teleported onto the battlefield. He was tall and terrifying. He wore a cape of metal scales. He held a war scythe. He swung it. The blade passed through matter like smoke. He cut 3 Khrave in half with one swing. But then the Queen arrived. She had dragged herself from the depths. She was furious. She saw the Necron Lord. She saw the machine that was blocking the warp. She recognized the ancient enemy. She unleashed a psychic storm. Lightning made of purple fire struck the Necron Lord. His shields flared. He stumbled. The Queen screeched. Her warriors threw themselves at him. They piled on top of him. The Lord fought back. He was a blender of death, but the weight of numbers was crushing him. Blade saw his chance. He did not watch the fight. He looked at the pylon. The control node was exposed. The Necrons had opened the panel to work on it. It was a glowing green crystal. Blade aimed his modified shotgun. He pumped the action. The magnetic coils whined. He took a deep breath. He fired. The blast was blinding. The Gauss slug hit the crystal. It did not break it. It destabilized it. The energy inside the crystal went wild. It turned from green to white. The pylon began to shake. The hum became a scream. The sound shattered glass in the buildings a mile away. The pylon was not dampening the warp anymore. It was amplifying the feedback. It sent a pulse of raw energy into the sky. The pulse hit the Khrave first. Since they were psychic, their brains acted like antennas. The feedback fried their neural pathways. The Queen seized up. She vomited black blood. The warriors collapsed, twitching. The psychic link was broken. The Necrons were not affected by the psychic pain, but the physical shockwave hit them. The pylon exploded. Shards of black stone flew like missiles. The explosion vaporized the center of the plaza. The Necron Lord was thrown across the square. His metal body was twisted. Blade held onto the beam. The heat singed his coat. The shockwave rattled his teeth. He watched the destruction. It was beautiful. It was horrible. The two armies were broken. The Khrave were in a coma. The Necrons were in disarray. Their command structure was severed. Blade dropped down from the beam. He landed on the cracked pavement. He walked through the smoke. He walked past the twitching bodies of the aliens. He walked past the broken machines. He walked to the Necron Lord. The Lord was trying to stand up. His internal gyroscope was damaged. He sparked. He looked at Blade with burning green eyes. He tried to speak. The sound was a distorted, static screech. Blade did not let him speak. He raised his shotgun. He put the barrel against the Lord's metal skull. He pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. Blade cursed. He threw the shotgun away. He drew his sword. The Lord swiped at him with a claw. Blade caught the metal wrist. He struggled. The machine was strong. Blade's muscles burned. He used his vampire strength. He pushed back. He raised his sword. He drove it down into the Lord's neck cables. He twisted Sparks flew. The green light in the Lord's eyes faded. The machine went limp. Blade kicked the body away. He looked around. The Queen was dead. The feedback had turned her brain to soup. The threat on the ground was neutralized, but the chain reaction was not done. The pulse from the pylon had not stopped at the atmosphere. It had gone into space. In orbit, the hammer of justice was blind. The pulse had burned out the ship's sensors. The cogitators were offline. The bridge was dark. Admiral Crix was shouting orders. He demanded eyes on the target. Magos Valen was plugging himself directly into the ship's core. He was trying to route power. But the pulse had done something else. It had acted like a flare. It had lit up the system on the long-range scanners. Deep in the void, something saw the light. It was the Hive Fleet splinter. Tyranids. They had been passing by the system, asleep. The energy spike woke them up. They changed course. They turned toward Tenebris. The chain reaction of Blade's choice had solved one problem but created a much worse one. The Necrons were the anvil. The Khrave were the hammer. Blade had broken them both. But now the great devourer was coming to eat the scraps. Blade felt it. He felt the shadow in the warp deepen. He looked at the sky. The clouds were swirling. He knew he had bought time, but the cost was high. He checked his comm bead. It was frying with static. He tapped it. "Castle, report." The voice came back weak. "We saw the light Daywalker. The machines. They stopped moving. The tunnel patrols just froze." Blade nodded. "Gather the supplies," he said. "Raid the Necron outposts while they are rebooting. Take everything. Metal, power cells, wires. We need to build." "Build what?" Casto asked. "Defenses," Blade said. "The war isn't over. The players just changed." Blade started to walk back to the sewers. He stopped at a dead Khrave warrior. He cut open its chest. He found the adrenal gland. It was still pumping. He cut it out. He put it in a pouch. He could refine this. He could make a stimulant. He would need it. He was tired. His body was eating itself. The hunger was always there. Strategic board. State update. The Necron pylon was destroyed. The pariah field was gone. The Necron reanimation protocols were slowed down by 40%. The Khrave invasion force was effectively decapitated. The remaining Khrave were feral beasts with no coordination. The Imperial blockade was blinded and vulnerable. A Tyranid splinter fleet was 48 hours away. Blade returned to the water plant. The mood was different. The humans were cheering. They had seen the green light die. They thought they had won. Blade did not cheer. He walked to the center of the room. He threw the head of the Necron Lord on the table. The metal skull clattered. The cheering stopped. "Do not celebrate," Blade said. His voice was gravel. "We just cleared the board, but the game has new rules." He looked at the map. He took a piece of charcoal. He drew a new arrow coming from the sky. He drew a circle around their base. "The Imperium will not help us," he said. "They are blind. The machines will wake up in a week. The feral aliens will hunt us for food, and something new is coming from the stars." He looked at the survivors. They were scared, but they were listening. They were looking at him like a leader. Blade hated that. He was a hunter, not a general, but he had no choice. "We need to go deeper," Blade said. "The surface is a trap. The upper tunnels are a killing ground. We are going to the core." "The core is hot," a soldier said. "It's radioactive. It's warm," Blade corrected. "And the radiation blocks the sensors. We will adapt. We will become the monsters in the dark." Blade walked to his corner. He sat down. He took the Khrave gland. He started to work on his alchemy kit. He mixed the fluids. He injected the mix into his arm. The pain was sharp. but the strength returned. His eyes glowed brighter. He felt the power of the enemy coursing through him. He was becoming a hybrid of everything he killed. He was using Necron tech and Xenos biology. He was a heresy walking on two legs. High above, Inquisitor Grendel was having a seizure. His psychic wardings had failed when the pulse hit. He was foaming at the mouth. The medics were holding him down. He was screaming prophecies. He screamed about the shadow in the warp. He screamed about the hunger that never ends. He screamed that Tenebris was the dinner plate. When he woke up, he was weak. He looked at the Admiral. "Burn it," Grendel whispered. "Burn it all." "We can't," the Admiral said. "The weapon systems are offline. The machine spirits are traumatized. We are drifting." Grendel closed his eyes. He realized the truth. The Imperium had lost control. The blockade was broken. The planet was on its own. The quarantine was now a prison for everyone, including the fleet. They were trapped in the gravity well with the monsters. Blade knew this too. He felt the desperation of the humans in the sky. He did not pity them. They had their chance. Now it was survival of the fittest. He picked up the Necron Lord's warseath. It was heavy. It was balanced. It hummed with a low frequency. He swung it. It sliced the air. It was a good weapon. Better than his broken sword. He whispered to the dark. "The chain reaction is complete." He looked at his reflection in the polished metal of the scythe. He looked different. His face was thinner. His skin was grey. He looked like the world he was fighting for. He was becoming Tenebris. He sheathed the scythe on his back. He signaled Casso. "Move out," Blade ordered. "We have work to do." The column of survivors moved into the deep dark. They carried their meager possessions. They carried the hope of the species. And at the front, the Daywalker led the way, a vampire armed with the scythe of a dead god, walking into the belly of the planet to wait for the sky to fall. The strategic shift was absolute. The war for territory was over. The war for the soul of the planet had begun, and the Tyranids were bringing a hunger that would test even the blade. The atmosphere of the story shifted from military action to survival horror. The scale of the threat had increased. The victory against the pylon was a tactical success, but a strategic disaster. This is the nature of Warhammer 40K. There are no happy endings. There are only delays. Blade had bought a delay. He had traded a quick death by Necron silence for a slow death by Tyranid consumption. But in that delay, there was a chance. A small, razor-thin chance. And that was all he needed. The survivors walked past ancient machinery. They walked past the bones of civilizations that died millions of years ago. Tenebris was a graveyard of empires. The humans were just the latest tenants. Blade touched the walls. He felt the vibration of the planet. It was groaning. It was in pain. He promised the planet he would cut the cancer out, or he would die trying. The shadows swallowed them up. The silence returned to the plaza. The broken pylon sparked, and in the black sky, the stars began to disappear, one by one, blocked out by the approaching swarm. Yes, the arrival of the Tyranids was not an invasion. It was a weather event. It began 48 hours after the destruction of the pylon. The sensors on the planet were dead, but eyes could still see. The stars above Tenebris were blotted out. It looked like a bruised purple bruise was spreading across the void. Then the rain started. It was not water. It was not acid. It was spores. They were the size of softballs. They hit the atmosphere and burned, leaving trails of toxic smoke. When they hit the ground, they burst. They released a thick yellow fog. This was the mycetic spore stage. The Tyranids were terraforming the planet before they even touched it. They were changing the air so that only they could breathe it. Blade stood at the entrance of a deep geothermal vent. He watched the yellow fog drift down the elevator shafts. He sniffed the air. It smelled like rotten fruit and copper. He knew this smell. He had read the archives. This was the shadow in the warp made physical. The survivors huddled behind him. They were coughing. The air filters were working, but they were clogging up fast. Sergeant Casso looked at Blade. His one good eye was wide with fear. He asked what it was. Blade did not lie. He said it was the Great Devourer. He said the universe had come to eat them. The strategic situation had shifted from a ground war to a survival scenario. The Necrons were still rebooting. Their systems were slow after the pylon explosion. They were sluggish. The Tyranids took advantage of this. The first wave of bioships entered the atmosphere. They looked like giant fleshy ticks. They landed in the ruins of the Hive City. They opened their bellies and vomited out the swarm. Gaunts, hormagaunts, termagants, millions of them. They were small, the size of dogs, but they had razor claws and they never stopped running. They flooded the streets. They found the remaining Khrave. The Khrave tried to use their mind tricks, but the Tyranids had no minds to trick. They were part of a single hive mind. The Khrave screamed as they were torn apart and eaten. Their biomass was added to the pool. High above, the Imperial Fleet was dying. The hammer of justice was drifting without power. The Tyranid gargoyles, flying beasts with leather wings, swarmed the ship. They clogged the engines. They crawled into the weapon tubes. They broke through the observation glass. Admiral Crix fought on the bridge with a las pistol. He shot a gargoyle in the face. It fell, spitting acid. The acid melted through the deck. The vacuum of space sucked the crew out. Crix held onto his command chair. He watched his fleet burn. The Tyranids did not destroy the ships. They boarded them. They ate the crew. They turned the majestic vessels into floating tombs. The Imperium was no longer a factor. The blockade was gone. Down in the dark, Blade made a choice. It was a small choice. He needed to secure the perimeter of their hideout. There was a junction box 3 miles away. It controlled the heavy blast doors for the entire sector. If he could close them, they could seal themselves in the core. It would buy them a month of air. He told Casso to hold the line. He took the Warsith. He took his shotgun. He ran into the tunnels. The tunnels were a war zone. The Necrons had finally woken up fully. They were fighting the Tyranids. It was a battle of opposites. The Necrons were silent, green, and orderly. The Tyranids were screeching, purple and chaotic. Blade saw a phalanx of Necron warriors firing into a tide of gaunts. The Gauss flayers vaporized the aliens, but for every one they killed, 3 more climbed over the bodies. The Tyranids were using the dead bodies as a ramp. They tackled the Necrons. Their claws could not cut the living metal easily, but they could rip the joints apart. Blade saw a Tyranid warrior, a big one, smash a Necron's head with a bone sword. Blade did not engage. He moved through the shadows. He was a ghost. He reached the junction room. It was a large chamber filled with gears and pistons. In the center was the control console, but it was not empty. There was a battle happening there too. A single Necron cryptek was cornered. A cryptek is a scientist, a sorcerer of technology. This one was different. It floated on a mechanical tail like a snake. It had a single large eye. It was surrounded by genestealers. These were the elite shock troops of the Tyranids. They were fast. They had 4 arms. They were trying to crack the cryptek open to see what was inside. The cryptek was damaged. Its metal body was sparked. It was waving a staff, trying to keep the monsters back. Blade watched. He had a clear path to the console. He could pull the lever, lock the doors, and leave. The cryptek would die. The genestealers would eat it or break it. It did not matter. It was a Xenos machine. It was the enemy. Blade put his hand on the lever. The logical choice was to seal the doors. It was the safe choice. It was the mission. But Blade stopped. He looked at the cryptek. He saw something. The cryptek was not fighting to kill. It was fighting to protect something. Behind it, on the floor, was a small node. A data spike. The cryptek was shielding it with its own body. Blade's hunter instinct kicked in. Why would a machine care about a spike? Why die for it? The Necrons usually teleported away when they were losing. This one was staying. That meant the spike was important, valuable. Blade made the choice. He let go of the door lever. He racked his shotgun. He stepped out of the shadows. He did not yell. He just fired. The magnetic slug hit a genestealer in the back. It exploded in a shower of purple gore. The other three turned around. They hissed. Blade smiled. He liked it when they looked at him. He swung the warsith. The heavy blade sliced through the air. It cut the genestealer in half. The alien didn't even know it was dead before its legs fell over. The last two charged. Blade dropped to his knees. He slid under their claws. He came up behind them. He drove the scythe through one. He shot the other in the head. It was over in 4 seconds. Blade stood up. He breathed heavily. The air was getting thin. He turned to the cryptek. The machine floated there. It watched him. Its eyes zoomed in and out. It was calculating. It was confused. A biological organism had saved it. This broke its logic subroutines. Blade did not lower his weapon. He pointed the scythe at the cryptek. He pointed to the data spike. He asked what it was. The cryptek did not speak Gothic. It made a sound like a dial-up modem. Screeyong bzz. Then it did something unexpected. It projected a hologram. It was a map of the planet. It showed the tunnels. It showed the Tyranids. And it showed the spike. The spike was a key, a master key. The cryptek pointed a metal finger at the floor. Then it pointed at the millions of tiny repair scarabs that were frozen on the walls. They were dormant. The Tyranids ignored them because they were small and metal. The cryptek was the shepherd. The spike was the whistle. Blade understood. If he saved the cryptek, he saved the key to the scarabs. Blade lowered his weapon. He nodded. The cryptek floated closer. It extended a small mechadendrite. It touched Blade's shoulder. It analyzed his armor. It analyzed the Necron technology he was using. It seemed to approve. It repaired a crack in Blade's shoulder blade with a beam of light. It was a truce, an unholy alliance. Blade pointed to the door controls. He signaled for the cryptek to help him. The cryptek interfaced with the console. The blast doors slammed shut. The sector was sealed. But Blade did not stop there. He looked at the cryptek. He pointed at the ceiling. He pointed at the Tyranid infestation above. He made a gesture of eating. The cryptek understood. It slotted the data spike into the mainframe. This was the massive outcome. The small choice to save one machine changed the nature of the war. The cryptek activated the Canoptek Swarm protocol. This was not a combat protocol. It was a recycling protocol. Usually, it was used to clean up debris, but with a slight modification. Debris could mean biological matter. Deep in the walls of the hive, millions of tiny lights turned on. The scarabs woke up. They were the size of beetles. They had mandibles that could cut through diamond. They swarmed out of the vents. They did not attack like soldiers. They moved like a carpet. They flowed over the floor. They flowed up the walls. The Tyranids were busy fighting the Necron warriors. They did not notice the carpet of metal bugs until it was too late. The scarabs swarmed over a gaunt. In seconds, the gaunt was gone. Just a skeleton was left. Then the skeleton was gone. The scarabs ate the bone too. They converted the matter into energy. They used the energy to build more scarabs. It was a self-replicating weapon. The Tyranids had a problem. They relied on biomass. They ate their dead to recycle the energy, but the scarabs were eating the biomass first. The Tyranids were losing their fuel. The hive mind felt a sharp pain. Its resources were being stolen. The swarm of scarabs grew. It became a silver tide. It clashed with the purple tide of the Tyranids. Blade and the Cryptek watched the screens. The map turned silver. The scarabs were pushing the Tyranids back. But there was a problem. The scarabs were not discriminating. They were eating the moss. They were eating the rats. They were eating the wooden crates in the survivor camp. They were eating everything organic. Blade realized what he had done. He had unleashed a grey goo scenario. The scarabs would scrub the planet clean. They would strip it down to the bedrock. He looked at the Cryptek. The machine was vibrating with efficiency. It was happy. The planet was being cleaned. Blade grabbed the Cryptek by its metal neck. He shook it. He shouted. He told it to exclude the humans. He told it to mark Sector 7 as safe. The Cryptek looked at him. It calculated the probability of Blade killing it. The probability was 100%. The Cryptek complied. It sent a new code. The scarabs diverted around the water processing plant. They flowed around the humans like a river around the rock. But everywhere else, the feasting continued. This changed the war completely. The Tyranids were now the prey. They tried to adapt. They spawned acid-spitting bugs to melt the scarabs. It worked for a while. But the scarabs were too many. For every scarab melted, 2 more were built from the Tyranid shell. The Necron warriors retreated. They let the scarabs do the work. The Necron lords were pleased. Efficiency was their god. But the Tyranids are not stupid. The hive mind is ancient. It saw that the ground war was unwinnable against the Eaters. It changed tactics. It abandoned the surface. It abandoned the tunnels. It consolidated its forces. All the Tyranids began to move towards one location, the central heat sink of the hive, the main geothermal shaft. Blade saw the movement on the map. He saw the red dots of the Tyranids clustering. He asked the Cryptek what was there. The Cryptek showed a schematic. The heat sink went straight down to the planetary core. If the Tyranids couldn't eat the surface, they would eat the heart of the world. They were going to dig. They were going to destabilize the core. They would crack the planet open like an egg and drink the magma. This was the catastrophe. Blade's choice to use the scarabs had forced the Tyranids into a checkmate move. They were going to destroy the board. The ground began to shake. It was a deep, rhythmic thumping. The Tyranids were digging. They were using giant trigons, massive snake-like burrowers. Blade looked at the Cryptek. The Alliance was still holding barely. "We have to stop them," Blade said. "If they crack the core, we all burn, metal and flesh alike." The Cryptek agreed. Logic dictated survival, but the scarabs could not go into the heat sink. The heat was too intense. Their circuits would melt. The Necron warriors were too slow to catch the digging beasts. That left only one option: a strike team, a small, fast unit that could go into the heat and kill the diggers. Blade checked his weapons. His shotgun was out of ammo. The magnetic coils were burnt out. His sword was chipped. The war scythe was heavy. He was tired. He had not slept in days. He looked at his hands. The veins were black. The Necron tech he was using was poisoning him. The serum he injected was changing his DNA. He was becoming less human every hour. He radioed Casso. "Get the survivors to the upper levels," Blade said. "The heat is going to rise. The core is compromised." "Where are you going?" Casso asked. "I'm going down," Blade said. "I have a date with a big worm." Blade looked at the cryptek. "You coming, metalhead?" The cryptek floated silently. It grabbed a heavy-looking device from the wall. It was a phase shifter. It allowed the user to walk through solid walls for short bursts. It handed the device to Blade. It was a gift, or maybe it was just a tool to ensure the asset completed the mission. Blade took it. He strapped it to his belt. They moved out. They descended into the depths. The heat grew unbearable. Blade's coat was smoking. His skin blistered and healed, blistered and healed. They reached the edge of the heatsink. It was a massive vertical tunnel 10 miles wide. In the center, a column of magma bubbled, and clinging to the walls were the Tyranids, thousands of them. They were tearing at the rock. The Trigons were diving into the lava, shielded by psychic barriers, digging deeper. Blade saw the leader. It was a Swarmlord, the apex predator of the Hive Fleet. It stood on a rock outcropping near the lava flow. It was directing the dig. It held 4 bone sabers. It radiated power. It saw Blade. It recognized him. The anomaly, the prey that fights back. Blade looked at the Swarmlord. He looked at the cryptek. He looked at the phase shifter. A plan formed in his mind. A suicidal plan. A plan that only a veteran of 100 impossible wars would think of. "Hey," Blade said to the cryptek. "Can you overcharge this shifter?" The cryptek beeped. It meant yes, but it also meant it would explode. "Perfect," Blade said. He stepped onto the edge. He looked down at the magma. He looked at the Swarmlord. "Time for the finale," he said. The strategic board was now set for the final convergence. The Scarabs held the tunnels. The Necrons held the surface ruins. The Tyranids held the core. And Blade held the detonator. The small choice to save one robot had led to a planet-killing standoff. The outcome was massive. Tenebris was no longer a battlefield. It was a bomb, and the fuse was lit. Blade jumped. He did not jump at the Swarmlord. He jumped into the empty air of the shaft. He activated the phase shifter. He turned ghost-like. He fell faster than gravity should allow. He was aiming for the rock outcropping. He was aiming for the space inside the rock. He materialized inside the stone just for a second, then phased out again. He was blinking through reality. The Swarmlord roared. It sent a psychic blast at him. Blade phased through it. He landed on the platform. He was smoking. The heat was cooking him alive. He stood 10 feet from the monster. The Swarmlord raised its 4 swords. It hissed. It was fast, faster than Blade. Blade didn't raise his weapon. He raised his hand. He held the comm bead. He opened a channel, not to Casso, not to the cryptek. He opened a channel to the drifting fleet in orbit. He used the codes the cryptek gave him to boost the signal through the interference. "Admiral," Blade croaked, "this is Subject 0. I have a target." On the bridge of the Hammer of Justice, the lights flickered on. The cryptek had done one more thing. It had sent a remote pulse to jumpstart the ship's reactor. The machine spirit woke up. It was angry. Admiral Crix looked at the console. He heard the voice. "I have no targeting sensors," Crix yelled. "I can't see you." "You don't need to see me," Blade said. He looked at the Swarmlord. The monster charged. "Just aim for the biggest heat signature on the planet and fire everything." Blade dropped the comm bead. He grabbed the war scythe with both hands. The Swarmlord swung. Blade parried. The sound was like a thunderclap. The bone sword chipped the metal scythe. Blade was thrown back towards the lava. He dug his boots into the rock. "Come on," he screamed at the monster. "Let's dance." The Swarmlord lunged again. Blade ducked. He slashed the monster's leg. Acid blood sprayed. Blade's skin sizzled. He didn't care. He needed to keep it here. He needed to keep it busy for 30 seconds. That was how long a macro cannon shell took to travel from orbit to the core. The Cryptek watched from the ledge above. It recorded the data. It calculated the odds of survival. 0. It calculated the odds of planetary destruction. High. It turned and floated away. Its mission was done. The logic was satisfied. This ended with the sound of a falling hammer. The shell was in the air. The Tyranids were digging. The scarabs were eating. And Blade was fighting a duel on the edge of hell, waiting for the sky to fall on his head. The consequences of his choice would echo for centuries. He had turned a rescue mission into an exterminatus, but he had done it on his terms, and that was the only victory he needed. The macro cannon shell fell from the sky like a meteor made of iron. It was the size of a building. It glowed red from the friction of the air. It screamed as it came down. The sound was so loud it cracked the rocks before it even hit. In the geothermal shaft, the Swarmlord looked up. Its 4 eyes saw the death coming. It did not feel fear. It felt calculation. It realized that the biomass in this location was about to be vaporized. It tried to jump. It tried to leap to a higher ledge. But it was too late. The shell hit the magma pool directly below the platform. The impact was absolute. The liquid rock did not splash. It vaporized. A bubble of pure kinetic energy expanded outward. It hit the rock walls. It hit the Tyranids clinging to the stone. It hit the Swarmlord. The monster was smashed against the wall with the force of 1,000 trains. Its bone armor shattered. Its limbs were crushed. The heat was hotter than the surface of a star for 1 second. Blade saw the white light. He activated the phase shifter. The world turned grey and silent. He became a ghost. The explosion passed through him. He saw the rocks melting. He saw the fire raging. But he could not feel it. He was out of phase with reality. He was floating in a void between dimensions, but the device was not built for this. It was overheating. It burned his skin where it touched his belt. The battery died. Reality snapped back. Blade fell. The platform was gone. The ledge was gone. He was falling into a cavern of fire and drifting ash. He hit a slope of cooling slag. He rolled. He tumbled for hundreds of feet. He smashed into a wall of obsidian. He lay there gasping for air. The air was full of sulfur and dust. He checked his body. His coat was burned away. His armor was fused to his skin. His ribs were broken again, but he was alive. He looked down. The bottom of the shaft was a lake of fire, and rising from the lake was the Swarmlord. It was not dead. It was missing an arm. Half of its face was burned off, but it was regenerating. The flesh was knitting itself back together. It screamed a challenge. It was a sound that shook the stones. It wanted to finish the duel. It did not care about the bombardment. It only cared about the prey. Blade stood up. He reached for the war scythe. It was gone. He reached for his guns. They were melted. He had nothing. He had his hands, he had his teeth, and he had the serum in his blood. He felt the hunger. It was a wild animal clawing at his stomach. He looked at the Swarmlord. He didn't see a monster. He saw a meal. He saw power. High above the planet, the hammer of justice was dying. The recoil of the shot had broken the ship's spine. The engines were offline. The life support was failing. Admiral Criggs sat in the dark. He watched the view screen. The planet Tenebris was cracking. The impact had triggered a tectonic shift. Giant lines of fire were appearing on the continents. The crust was breaking apart. Margos Valen's voice came over the speaker. It was weak. He said the core stability was at 0%. He said the planet would break into asteroid chunks in less than an hour. He said the mission was a failure. The Admiral closed his eyes. He prayed to the Emperor. He asked for forgiveness. He had destroyed a world to save a sector. It was the Imperial way, but it still tasted like ash. But the planet did not break. Down in the deep dark, something else woke up. The Necrons were not just sleeping in the tombs. The tombs were the planet. The core of Tenebris was not just molten iron. It was a tesseract vault. It was a prison built by the star gods millions of years ago. The bombardment had cracked the outer shell, but it had activated the defense protocols. Green lightning shot up from the cracks in the ground. It was not destructive lightning. It was binding energy. It grabbed the tectonic plates. It pulled them back together. Huge pillars of black stone erupted from the mountains. They fired beams of gravity into the sky. They created a cage around the world. The planet was trying to hold itself together. In the shaft, the gravity shifted. Blade felt heavy. The air grew cold. The lava lake stopped bubbling. It froze in place. The heat was sucked away by the machines. The Swarmlord slowed down. Its metabolism was fueled by heat and speed. The sudden cold made it sluggish. Blade saw his chance. He ran down the slope. He moved like a wolf. He did not shout. He saved his breath. The Swarmlord swung its remaining bone swords. Blade slid under the swing. He jumped onto the monster's chest. He dug his fingers into the open wound on its neck. He pulled. He tore the alien flesh. The Swarmlord thrashed. It slammed Blade against the rock. Blade held on. He bit into the monster's neck. He drank the toxic blood. It burned like acid, but it gave him strength. It gave him the memories of the hive mind. He saw galaxies being eaten. He saw the hunger of the void. He pushed the pain away. He found the central nerve cluster. He ripped it out with his bare hand. The Swarmlord stiffened. The light in its eyes went out. It fell backward onto the frozen lava. It was dead. Blade stood on the corpse of the king of monsters. He wiped the purple blood from his mouth. He roared. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of a predator claiming his kill. The remaining Tyranids in the shaft heard it. They stopped digging. The link to the hive mind was severed. They became confused beasts. They retreated into the shadows. But the victory was short. A sound filled the chamber. It was the sound of a bell tolling. A teleportation portal opened in the air. It was a green circle of light. Out of the portal stepped a figure. It was not a warrior. It was a lord. It was tall, draped in metal cloth that shimmered like gold. It held a staff that topped with a captured star. This was Nemesor Zandrik, or someone like him, an overlord of the dynasty. The overlord did not look at the dead Tyranid. He looked at Blade. He looked at the chaos. He floated down to the ground. He spoke. His voice was not mechanical. It was translated directly into Blade's mind. It sounded aristocratic. It sounded bored. "You are very loud," the overlord said. "We are trying to sleep." Blade looked at the machine. He was ready to fight, but he was tired. His body was breaking down. The Tyranid blood was fighting with the Necron serum in his veins. He was shaking. "The bugs were eating your house," Blade rasped. "I killed the exterminator." The overlord nodded slowly. "Logical. You removed the biological infestation, but you also damaged the stasis integrity. The bombardment was crude." "It worked," Blade said. "Barely," the overlord corrected. "The planet is now unstable. If we lower the containment fields, the core will explode. If we keep them up, nothing can leave. The surface is sealed. The orbit is blocked." Blade realized what this meant. The Admiral couldn't leave. The survivors couldn't leave. The Tyranids couldn't leave. They were all trapped in a bottle. "So what now?" Blade asked. "You kill me." The Overlord laughed. It was a dry, metallic rattle. Kill you? No. You are efficient. You are durable. You possess a unique biology, a hybrid of our ancient enemy and the new devourer. The Overlord stepped closer. We have a vacancy. Blade narrowed his eyes behind his broken glasses. I don't need a job. It is not a job, the Overlord said. It is a function. The planet must remain sealed for 10,000 years to repair the core. During that time, the remaining Tyranids will try to breed. The humans will try to rebel. The systems need a caretaker, a warden for the prison. Blade looked up at the shaft. He thought about Casso. He thought about the survivors in the water plant. If the Necrons took full control, they would just gas the humans to save oxygen. They would purge all life. And the humans? Blade asked. They are irrelevant, the Overlord said. But if you accept the position, you may determine their allocation, as long as they stay in their designated zones, as long as they are quiet. It was an offer, a terrible offer. Blade could become the jailer of Tenebris. He could save the humans, but only as prisoners. He would be trapped in the dark with the monsters forever. He would never see the sun. He would never see the Imperium again. He would be a king of ashes. Blade looked at his hands. They were grey and clawed. He wasn't human anymore. He didn't fit in the Imperium. The Inquisition would burn him on sight. This hole was the only place he belonged. I have conditions, Blade said. The Overlord tilted his head. Negotiation. How amusing. Speak. The survivors get Sector 7. Permanent sanctuary. You give them air recyclers that work. You give them food processors. And you leave them alone. No harvesting. No experiments. The Overlord processed the request. Acceptable. A small resource drain. And in return, Blade said, picking up a broken piece of the Swarmlord's bone sword, I hunt the rest of the bugs. I keep the tunnels clear. I make sure nothing wakes you up. The Overlord extended a metal hand. The contract is struck. The Daywalker is now the Night Warden. Blade did not shake the hand. He just nodded. The Overlord turned and floated back to the portal. Do not disappoint us, the machine said. We will be watching. The portal closed. The green lightning faded to a dull glow. The gravity returned to normal. Blade stood alone in the dark. He was in pain, but the hunger was gone. He felt a new connection. The planet's systems were speaking to him. The Necron network was recognizing his authority. He saw the map in his mind. He saw the survivors huddled in the upper levels. He saw the scattered Tyranids hiding in the deep sumps. He saw the Admiral's ship drifting in orbit, trapped in the gravity net. Blade started to walk. He had a long walk back to Sector 7. He had to tell Casso the news. They had won. But the price of victory was a life sentence. The strategic reality of Tenebris had shifted permanently. It was no longer an Imperial world. It was a tomb world. But it was a tomb world with a heartbeat. The Tyranids were trapped. They would become feral. They would evolve into tunnel horrors. The humans would become a clan of scavengers, living in the protected zone. They would forget the Emperor. They would forget the sky. They would worship the Daywalker who kept the dark at bay. Blade climbed the maintenance ladders. He found a cache of weapons he had stashed days ago. He reloaded his shotgun. He found a new coat on a dead commissar. He put it on. It fit. He put on his glasses. Even in the dark, he needed them. They hid his eyes. His eyes were not red anymore. They were green, a burning electric green. He reached the survivor camp 3 days later. The people were terrified. The sky had turned black. The Necron pylons were humming a song that made them dizzy. When Blade walked in, they went silent. He looked different. He looked like a statue made of scars. Casso walked up to him. Daywalker, he said. "The sky, it's solid. We can't get a signal out. What happened?" Blade sat down on a crate. He cleaned his new bone sword. "The war is over, Casso," he said. "Did we win?" Casso asked. Blade looked around at the dirty, starving people. They were alive. They were breathing. "We survived," Blade said. "That's the only win you get in this galaxy." He told them the rules. He told them about the deal. Some cried. Some got angry. They wanted to go home. Blade told them this was home now. He told them the alternative was the airlock or the dinner plate. They quieted down. They understood survival. Blade set up the new order. He organized the patrols. He showed them how to use the Necron tech the Overlord had unlocked for them. He taught them how to hunt the feral gaunts for meat. It was a hard life, a brutal life, but it was a life. Years passed. The story of the Daywalker became a myth. The children born in the tunnels didn't believe he was a man. They thought he was a spirit. The hammer of justice became a moon in the sky, a rusting hulk that blocked the stars. The Tyranids tried to rise up twice. Both times Blade went into the deep. Both times he came back covered in ichor, and the screaming stopped. The Imperium wrote Tenebris off as a loss. The records were sealed. It was marked as a forbidden world. Ships were warned to stay away. The warp storms around the system made it impossible to enter anyway. The galaxy moved on. The wars continued elsewhere. But deep in the segmentum obscurus, the planet spun on. It was a prison. It was a fortress. And in the center of the web sat Blade. He was older now, slower, but stronger. The Necron metal in his blood was slowly replacing his bones. He spent his days in meditation. He spent his nights on the hunt. One day, a scout came running to him. A young boy named Jack. "Lord Warden," the boy said. "We found something. Near the surface airlock. Someone broke in." Blade stood up. He hadn't had a visitor in 20 years. "Who?" "They wear power armor," Jack said. "But it's not grey. It's black. And they have skulls on their helmets." Blade frowned. The Legion of the Damned. Or something else. He grabbed his weapons. He walked to the surface airlock. The great blast doors were sealed, but the small personnel hatch had been cut open. Standing in the corridor were 5 giants, space marines. But they were not loyalists. They had spikes on their armor. They had the 8-pointed star carved into their chest plates. Chaos Space Marines, the word bearers. The leader of the squad took off his helmet. His face was tattooed with runes. He smiled. "We heard a rumor," the traitor Marine said. "We heard there was a weapon here. A creature that defied the hive mind and the machine god." Blade cracked his neck. He stepped out of the shadows. The green light of his eyes reflected on the traitor's armor. "You heard wrong," Blade said. "There is no weapon here, just the janitor." The traitor laughed. He raised his bolter. "Then the janitor dies." Blade didn't flinch. He triggered the command code in his mind. The walls of the corridor came alive. Hidden Gauss flares emerged from the stone. The scarabs dropped from the ceiling. The traitor Marines looked around in shock. "You are trespassing," Blade said. "And I don't like visitors." The corridor erupted in green fire. The Chaos Marines didn't even have time to scream. They were disintegrated. Their souls were sent back to the warp. Blade walked over the ash. He picked up a bolt pistol. It was a good model. He kept it. He looked at the open hatch. He could see the stars for the first time in decades. The warp storm had cleared for a moment. He could leave. He could take their ship. He could go find the Imperium. He could try to find a cure. He looked at the stars. They were cold and distant. Then he looked back at the tunnel. He heard the hum of the air recyclers, keeping his people alive. He heard the chittering of a lictor in the vents. He felt the pulse of the Necron tomb. He closed the hatch. He welded it shut. He turned his back on the galaxy. His war was here. His duty was here. He was the blade of Tenebris, and there were still monsters in the dark that needed killing. He walked back down into the gloom. The strategic condition was stable. The board was locked. The game was a stalemate, and that was just how he liked it. The chronicle ends here, not with a parade, not with a medal, but with a silent promise kept in the dark. The Imperium forgets its heroes. History turns to dust, but the legends survive as long as there is someone left to whisper them in the dark. The file on the Tenebris incident was officially closed in the 42nd Millennium. The Inquisition marked the system as perdita. This means it is forbidden. Any ship that enters the system is to be fired upon. Any ship that leaves the system is to be burned. The official record states that the planet was lost to a warp storm and subsequent Xenos consumption. The Administratum erased the tax records. The families of the billion dead citizens were given no notification. It was as if the world never existed. But space is vast, and secrets are hard to keep forever. 300 years after the sealing of the core, a rogue trader vessel named the Gilded Drake drifted off course during a warp jump. It emerged at the edge of the Tenebris system. The captain of the Drake reported a strange phenomenon. The planet was still there. It was not consumed. It was encased in a cage of black stone beams and green energy. The sensors detected no orbital traffic. The debris of the Hammer of Justice was still there, a rusted belt of metal orbiting the world. The captain tried to scan the surface. The atmosphere was thick with toxic clouds, but the deep scan auspex picked up thermal pockets. There were heat signatures in the northern continent, deep underground. They were small, they were clustered, and they were human. The rogue trader did not land. He was a greedy man, but he was not a fool. He felt the dread radiating from the world. However, he did record a transmission. It was a weak signal, repeating on an ancient Imperial frequency. It was not a distress beacon. It was not a plea for help. It was a warning. The voice was mechanical, grinding, and cold, but the cadence was human. It repeated a simple message. This is the Warden. The cage is locked. The beasts are hungry. Stay away. The captain noted that the voice sounded like gravel crushing glass. He ordered his navigator to jump out of the system immediately. He later sold the coordinates to the Ordo Xenos, who promptly executed him for heresy to keep the secret. Down in the dark, the society of Sector 7 had evolved. They no longer remembered the sun. The descendants of Sergeant Casso and the other survivors had become a new strain of humanity. They were pale, with eyes that could see in total darkness. They were short and stocky, built for the tunnels. They wore armor made from the chitin of dead gaunts. They carried weapons scavenged from the Necron armories, powered by the dying embers of the Tomb World. They did not worship the god Emperor of Terror. They had forgotten him. The sky was a myth to them. Instead, they worshipped the Night Warden. They built shrines at the crossroads of the tunnels. The shrines were made of silver stakes and Tyranid skulls. They left offerings of water and mushrooms. They told their children stories. They said that if you are good, the Warden protects you. If you are bad, or if you make too much noise, the Warden gives you to the bugs. It was a religion of fear and survival. But it worked. The population was stable. They maintained the air recyclers. They kept the pact. They were the only free humans in the sector, even if their freedom was limited to a few hundred miles of rock. As for the Daywalker, he had become part of the planet's immune system. The Necron Overlord kept his word in his own twisted way. He provided the technology to keep Blade alive, but the cost was high. Blade was no longer truly biological. The necrodermis, the living metal of the Necrons, had bonded with his vampire physiology. He did not age, he did not sleep. He sat on a throne of black stone in the central hub, plugged into the planetary monitoring system. He could feel every tremor in the earth. He could sense every Tyranid that hatched in the deep lava tubes. He was a prisoner, a king, and a monster. He hunted when he needed to. He culled the Tyranid herds to keep their numbers low. He executed any human who tried to breach the surface. He kept the balance. The Necrons slept in their stasis crypts, content that their biological janitor was doing his job. The Tyranids became a degenerate species, blind and feral, trapped in the dark with a predator they could not kill. The strategic legacy of the Tenebris incident is studied only by the highest levels of the Death Watch. They view it as a unique anomaly. It is the only known instance where a Tyranid infestation was halted, not by fire but by containment. It is a stalemate that has lasted centuries. But the scholars ask a question. What happens when the Warden finally dies? What happens when the machine parts fail, or the vampire blood runs dry? There is no answer. For now, the planet spins in the dark. The warning beacon repeats its message, and in the shadows of the hive, the blade still sharpens his scythe, waiting for the next movement in the dark. The chronicle is finished. The history is recorded. The file is closed.